Welcome to AuthentiCity FM episode 31. And if you have ever wondered how Lotus 123, The Sword of Catherine, Chihuly Glass, Yeti Mugs, and Ronnie Coleman all fit to describe our next guest, stick around. We'll see you on the other side. Well, if you've been a fan of the podcast, you know I love to do these little wordplay kind of things. And so Lotus 123 is one of the first and the original analytical tools that existed in software. Our next guest is analytical. The Sword of Catherine was, of course, swung by Joan of Arc, one of the great female warriors in the world, in world history. And our next guest is a culture warrior. Chihuly Glass, if you've seen it, it's this beautiful ornate blown glass that's in the Pacific Northwest. There is a museum of glass in Tacoma. Tacoma always reminds me of a science class where you get to see the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, this kind of topsy-turvy engineering marvel that ultimately collapsed into the river. Our next guest is a bridge. Yeti Mugs, you've probably seen them on this podcast. It's a commodity that we use. It's kind of a funny ongoing bit. Thank you, Phil, for that, bringing that forward. But when I think of a Yeti mug, I think about something that could be overflowing with coffee or whatever. And when you're overflowing, you have a lot of passion. Our guest has a lot of passion. And then lastly, Ronnie Coleman, a little obscure, one of the most famous bodybuilders in the world. And when you go to the gym and you're working out, you want to make sure that if you're lifting weights, you have a spotter. And a spotter is really somebody who empowers you to do your best. All of those things wrap up to describe our next guest and my friend, Angela Nicholson. Angela, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting any of those words. Very
No, that's part of the bit. It's just a one opportunity to be creative and a little quirky. And so you and I know each other a little bit. And so I want you to you get a couple of minutes. I always try to say less time, but so take as much time as you need. Who are you? Why are you here? How did you come to arrive on this podcast?
All right. Who am I? I am a 23-year, 24-year local government person, committed to local government. How I got on this podcast is probably a bit of a roundabout story. I took over HPO and local government last September, which is a local organization that is really working with local governments to figure out how do we create high-performing government organizations. So about 2017, I went through this program at the University of Virginia, and I fell in love with the program itself, some of the tools that you utilize, and kind of went back and worked that model in my own organizations. As I prepared to think about what the next part of my career was going to be, I was back in touch with the folks at Virginia, and they said, we want you to come teach with us. And so at that point, our organization had moved to the College of Charleston. And when I went to the College of Charleston, everyone kept mentioning this guy, Mike. This guy, Mike. This guy, Mike, is from Minnesota. Well, I'm from Minnesota. So last summer, as I was in Minnesota for my summer vacation, I said, I'm going to call this guy, Mike. And I found him on LinkedIn, and I texted him and said, hey, you want to have coffee? I think he did some background research to make sure he knew who I was. That's the story I've heard. And we had sat down and had coffee and just started talking about some of the work in local government and the program. And at the end of the conversation, I said, hey, is this something you want to do again? And he said, yep. And so that's how I met Mike. And that's how I think I ended up on this podcast, really talking about, how do we make local government better? And how do we I think we are surrounded by amazing people that are really committed to their communities and want to make their communities grow and prosper. And what's our role in helping to be that bridge for local organizations that, to get out of their own way and to really think about how do we get to those strategic initiatives and not get bogged down in the daily politics and the personnel issues and all the things that, are challenging. But I think the other side of this, there's just a lot of really amazing opportunity to create better communities. So I don't know if I answered the question. I think I might have.
Well, no, so this is the beautiful part of this. It's
Oh,
Authenticity FM. You get to be yourself. There
okay.
is no perfect answer. I did do a little bit of LinkedIn stalking because I was like, who is this strange person asking me to get coffee, which I appreciate. But I am so grateful. So as podcast listeners know, I love the HPO model. I try to bring it into every organization I go in. I am so grateful for your leadership in pulling this thing together. In about a minute, tell us where it is today, what's happening, and what can people expect if they participate in an HPO organizational model presentation.
Yeah. So again, we were at the University of Virginia for many years. The model was developed in the 80s by some federal government executives and then also some academics. And we moved to the College of Charleston for like a year and a half or 2 years during COVID. And now we've found our permanent landing spot at the University of Kansas with their School of Public Management. And so we kind of partner with them and do 3 7-day trainings a year, one in the spring, one in the summer, one in the fall. And then we also, on our own, go out and do kind of 3-day organizational work in cities across the country. So, what you would get if you came to Kansas is a lot of vulnerability, a lot of opportunity to really figure out your own leadership style. We really focus on you as your own change agent. It's not about how we impact necessarily how we impact other people, but how do we show up as our authentic selves. We do a lot of work on the model so people can really understand where are they getting hung up and what are the things that are not going well. And a lot of the focus is around organizational alignment. We really are looking at how do we get everyone in the organization facing the same direction, working on the same stuff so that we can accomplish more for the organization. When we go in when we go in and do a 3-day training with folks, we work a little bit more specifically on that city's issues. So it might be, I just did one, actually, I think Alyssa was here not that long ago, and I did one down in Rancho Cucamonga, and they were pretty far along on the path. And so we spent some time figuring out what was going to be the next things they worked on. They're rolling. They've already got people in groups talking about the right stuff. So we are definitely really careful to make it very specific to the organization we're training in. It's amazing work, and honestly, the best part of the work is you end up with 30 new friends every time. It's kind of amazing. People, they're so passionate. They are amazing folks. And I come back really, really inspired about local government.
So, Mike's talked about HPO. You are now leading it. For our listeners, if they're like, what is that? What are kind of the cliff notes about what's the so what behind the model, the ideology, and the programs that you're building out?
So it was interesting. We actually just did this exercise with our teams last week. We asked them to come up with a 30-second elevator pitch. They did a really great job. I mean, one of my team members said, "You can't do this work alone. If you don't do it in teams, we're not going to do it well." Um, it's about lifting up voices from every part of the organization. It's kind of getting rid of the idea that the smartest person is at the top of the hierarchy. It's just because you're the city manager and you've been in the seat and you've been the deputy and you've been the principal and you've done all the work doesn't mean you have all the answers. And so it's really freeing for people to say, oh, I actually can count on my people to do that work because they're the ones that are actually the experts in the work they're doing. And they can make decisions as long as I'm clear about where we're trying to go. So I think we give some really practical tools to actually implement that methodology or that ideology in your organization. We give kind of assessment tools, we give diagnostic tools, we give a lot of ideas. I think the other thing is that you learn from other organizations across the country what they're doing. So we have a lot of time where we just are in groups and tables and we mix people up so that they're learning from each other. Oh, we tried that, that didn't work. And so, really great opportunity, exhausting after 7 days, by the way, but really great opportunity to kind of um, take back ideas from across the country that you think might work in your organization.
So Angela, one of the things we talk about on this podcast somewhat regularly is that while we have been or are at the top of our organizations, it's nearly never that we actually have the answers that everybody wants us to give them. And that's complicated because organizations are somewhat trained to look up and say, that's the person who's sitting up there in that lofty office, and they must know everything that could possibly be known. And they're just, waiting for us to jump at their every beck and call. And the funny part is, we don't know any more than anybody else. We may have insights or thoughts or concepts that we want to work through, but we don't have the answer. I'm curious, when you get into these conversations, when you're working either directly with an organization or in these groups, how you start to deconstruct that that lofty, that, well, you got to look up in order to get the answers, right? How do you tell people or get people to stop assuming that that's the path that gets them the answer that they're looking for?
I think that's a great question. Number one, I think it's trained behavior. We've always done that. You, in your early structures, in your school structures, and your family structures, that's always been the our disposition is to look up because somebody else is going to tell us what to do. And I would ask, in many organizations, we've never asked people what they thought. And so when we start, it's really uncomfortable because people are like, well, wait, you've never done that before. Why? That's above my pay grade, right? That's the big, you're the decision maker. I think if we shift from being the know-it-all, which is hard for a lot of us because we got where we are because we know a lot of things, but not because we know everything, um, to being the empowerer, to actually reflecting back and engaging in active listening and saying to somebody, gosh, you had a project last year. How did you do that one? And really getting the person to reflect. I think active coaching starts with the belief that I believe that you know how to solve the problem because you've got enough competence and clarity to make the decision. But you have to just get people to believe that. And so it's asking the right questions. I think we become probers instead of answer people. And I think what happens, unfortunately, is that we fall back into the routine of answering the question too easily. It just is quicker. It's quicker to say, oh, yeah, I know that. That's what I did last year. Just do that. But to say to the person, um, how have you tried this before? Or what might to really ask some good coaching questions, I think is pivotal.
I think that's such an important point, is that we talk again a lot about hustle and all the things that have to be done and all the time that we don't have because we're so busy. And so what you just said is, it requires slowing down the process. It requires not giving the quick, easy answer. I know what it is. I've already done this before. And kind of retraining people to just come to you to say, I have this problem. How shall I solve it? And instead say back to them, no, how would you like to start thinking about solving it yourself? Because the time that requires is not insignificant. And I've seen that in my own organization, where we are pretty good at asking questions and getting people to do things, and then it gets busy.
Yeah.
And then we stop doing those questions because there's not enough time, and then we get mad at each other because, how come you don't already know this? And now so the tension builds again when the time gets finite. It's got to be, and I know Mike has done this, it's got to be very intentional to actually be in the manager's seat and sitting back and saying, nope, we're not going to rush it. We're going to empower, we're going to give that agency back to the people who frankly have the skill sets to do it. It's really um, off-putting for a lot of people. I know it's off-putting for me in the manager's seat to not always be the one who jumps in and tells people how to handle it.
I think the other important thing to remember is that it may take more time up front, but in the long run, you're saving a ton of time because now people are inside your head. right? And you're having this process and they're thinking of these solutions and they're coming up with the things on their own and you're building confidence so that the next time it comes up or maybe the time after that, they feel like they can go out and make the decision. And I think one of our trainers says, if not the same decision, a better one than you would have made because they have all of they have more information. They're the ones doing the work. We're not anymore. We like to believe we've been in local government for years and we've figured this stuff out, but we're not on the line doing the work. So I think and think about the culture we create when we do that. The culture of people believing in themselves and knowing that they actually can make a difference on their own for their community. It's pretty powerful.
So you mentioned going through the HPO program in 2017. That's almost a decade ago now, and the world is a fundamentally different place. So as you're now leading the program, how has your lens shifted on how you're implementing or how you're introducing different topics to the participants now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's something that we've really grappled with is how dramatically different the world is and how different community expectations are of us than they were 10 years ago. I think a big factor in that was COVID for a lot of our organizations. You had people that were accustomed to doing almost all of their work in paper, and all of a sudden we all went online in some form or fashion. And there is an expectation that we're delivering things differently. I think also as we all switched our meeting formats from in person to on Zoom, people had an opportunity to participate and then want that continued opportunity. So I think an important piece of HPO is engagement. And I think engagement is really demanded in our communities. And it helps you to think about, we call it strategic stakeholder value analysis, which is a mouthful. But really, what it is who are your customers and your clients? And are you meeting their wants, needs, and expectations? This kind of constant reiteration of, are we doing that well? And I think HPO made me, I served as the COVID EOC director for the County of Marin for about 2 years. And HPO made me a much better EOC director because we would have our morning debrief and people would go out and do the things. There was no, we sat around the table, we made decisions because the right people were at the table, and then they went out and did them. I didn't come back and say, wait, why did you buy that brand of porta potty? That was never part of the conversation. And so it forced me to trust and rely on the people that were doing the work. And honestly, it was very hard for me to go back into regular bureaucratic hierarchy after COVID because I had gotten so accustomed through that model to really trust the people that were doing the work and to get stuff done really quickly. It was really exciting. So I think, I really encourage people to think about where are their business processes we can improve? Where is there more? What does real engagement look like in community? Not fake engagement, like we go out and we do a survey and then we tell them next year what the results were but real engagement. How are we in focus groups, making sure that we're hearing communities that have been traditionally marginalized and make sure that we're lifting up those voices and actually doing what they're asking us to do. And I think HPO has given me the lens to think about who are our actual clients and customers. And I think that has, it's opened up when you asked me what my words were, Mike, one of the words I thought about was advocate. And then I really processed it. I'm like, people are going to think that's negative. That's negative in the role of leadership. But I am an advocate for good government and for the community, that everyone in our community has the opportunity to thrive. That's my goal. And so, I think HPO helps, that lens helps me to do that, to really think about, are we hearing from everyone that lives in our community or travels through our community and making sure they have what they need?
So you said some key phrases that for me was really important. You said the County of Marin. So counties are a critical layer in local government, and most of our listeners are probably city people. And there is a natural fight between counties and cities. Is that true in California like it is in the Midwest? And B, what do you think the source of that is? That's number two. And then um, What can we do as city managers to have a better relationship with the county? Because I know it's pretty common across the U.S.
Yep, still exists in California as well. I think, that um, it's a tough relationship because there's a perception about who holds power and who holds money, and everyone would like to have some of both. And so there's not enough perceived to go around. I think we've had really collaborative relationships with a lot of our city managers, and actually we had one of our Marin County city managers who just recently retired. He presented his poetry last week at Leading Edge in Kansas. So strong relationship there. I think figuring out it's kind of a Venn diagram of where are our overlapping interests and then how do we support each other. And there's going to be inherent things we disagree about because we don't want to fund them or you don't want to fund them um but having that courageous conversation around how do we get to the best thing for our community um is the most important. But yes, the County of Marin and its city managers, we certainly we do our best. We work really hard to have a good relationship.
So you had like a very difficult job during COVID, but I would imagine if for a long 23-year career, it's probably not the only thing you did for Marin. So what are some of the things that you did, and what are some of like maybe your favorite project or favorite thing that you worked on that you touched that wasn't COVID?
Let's see. I was a bit of a fix it person. So when things were broken, I got to go fix it. And that was fun. I did a lot of strategic initiatives. So I built an entire new performance management system, really looking at outcomes, community outcomes. I built a strategic plan and I built it with employees, which was really exciting. I had hundreds of employees on different teams that were helping to build and then hold the organization accountable. I'm a labor negotiator by trade. So I'm a lawyer and I've done labor negotiations for 23 years. So sat at every version of bargaining table. And, back when I first started, when a long time ago when I was young, um, there used to be a thing called labor peace and it doesn't exist anymore. There it's this you used to reach an agreement, we'd have a meal together and then we'd go off and for a few months we loved each other. And I think it's been hard because that doesn't exist so much anymore. It's kind of this constant push and pull. I've always had great respect for labor organizations and believe in what they do. But that's always some of my most satisfying work is really working with employees and trying to figure out solutions so that we can get the stuff out of the way so that they can do their best work.
So I want to I had written a couple words down. You talked about stakeholders, you talked about customer service. One of the things we've been kind of dabbling and talking about on the podcast is this idea that with the younger generations who are digital first, the lines on a map mean much less than they have at any other time in government. And so I'd love to get your perspective on as the profession, as the sense of community evolves. And you talked about the overlap between county and city. As people become less attached to what the map says as a physical space and more attached to kind of fluid concepts of community, how does that evolve from your perspective?
It's a great question. Um, I don't think people have, in most of my career, I don't think people have been that connected to the map, actually. I think people don't care where they get the service, they just want the service provided. And we in local government sometimes create kind of artificial barriers of, oh, you have to file a permit in this one location, but that's a city. And then it's really hard for people to kind of figure out our systems. And I think there is more awareness, more willingness to work together to create seamless solutions for community. I think also financially, we are going to continue to have problems funding local government the way local government has always been funded. And so I think people are JPAs and thinking about different ways of collaboration. And um, it's really interesting to see all of the things that come up when you're thinking about how do we overlap services. I mean, in Marin County, we have 260,000 people, which is a fairly small county, a fairly large land mass. And we have school districts and fire stations for each different little city. And you all know that's very expensive. And so slowly, some communities are kind of coming together and saying, we should do this differently. Is it actually true that we could provide better service if we did it in a coordinated way? And so it means that we have to kind of reevaluate our fiefdoms. Could we actually provide better public safety to community members if we were doing it together and having one dispatch center instead of having 10 different ones? I think it is going to take a new kind of leader. I think we have very traditionally stayed in our fiefdoms, and I think the community's going to demand. And I think there are lots of leaders who want to step out and say, let's do this differently and let's create something better. But it's scary. I think it takes a lot of courage to kind of step out and want to do it differently because a lot of communities say, but I like my fire department. And I think we kind of have to show a different model in order for people to get on board.
So I gotta jump in with this because it's one of my frustrations. So I come to you from the land of local governments, right? Illinois, with our 9,000 units of government across the state. I have worked in municipalities of various sizes that have had as many as 7 school districts serving 30,000 people. The logic behind all of that was, well, as these schools were first built, they were serving a small area. They created a district, and then the areas in between them filled in, and that's just how it is, and we couldn't possibly break that apart. And the community I worked in prior to the one I'm in now, there would be people who would come to the village board meetings, and they would say, we need to consolidate these school districts, and we've got to work differently. And the village board really had no authority over that, and they would say, look,
Right.
we'd like to help you, but there's nothing we can do. The districts are responsible for talking to one another and bringing it together. And then you'd take it to the next level, and just what you said a moment ago, you'd have the families who live in those various districts saying, hold on, time out.
Right.
I did not buy my house so that I would have to deal with the problems of the school district that's next door. That's their problem, not mine. Don't you ruin the good thing I got going because I want to be a big fish in a small pond. I do not want the opposite. And by the way, as I like to say, the argument that will always kill every conversation is one of two things: children will die, or you're going to tank my property values. Right? Those things, you can use those arguments for 99.9% of every issue that we are facing, but it's so difficult to get out of this mindset of, why do we have so many fire departments when we don't really fight fires like we used to? Why do we have so many school districts when, if we pulled them together and consolidated buildings, we'd save all sorts of money? If we had this opportunity to unify special districts, my community has about 10 units of government that serve the 9,000 people who live here. And it's the structures here in Illinois. But gosh, the courage that it takes to get to a conversation, let alone getting to an actual consolidation or a restructuring, is immense. And so many people just look at it and kind of shake their heads and say, it's never going to happen. So why put our time, resources, and energy into it? And so I think as we look kind of at the Gen Z and beyond generation, my hope is that courage comes back to kind of say, can we please take a moment and think about whether this is really the right way we should structure all of this stuff? Because it seems like it's really expensive and not all that efficient, and bureaucracy is bad, and maybe we could do some things better if we tried. I'm hopeful about that, but it's such a great meaty topic that has no good resolution. But we all talk about it all the time with hope and aspiration in our minds.
Well, and I think that new Gen Z, some of the characteristics that we're seeing in that newer generation is working on the meaty stuff. I mean, you see that people are willing to, I've never in my career had people so willing to quit a job while they don't have another job. Like all of us are like, oh, we would never do that. But the new gen, yeah, if I don't like it, I'm not getting what I need, I'm going to quit. So, I mean, I do see that I don't care what my level is. I want I want passion work. I want things that are really important. So I do think if you could just get, I don't know, like in the school situation, you've got all these superintendents or all of these high paid principals. If we could just focus the money on the kids and really, think about the outcomes for those students and also just about equity. I mean, we have these different levels of service based on 2 blocks away from each other. And then there are different outcomes in our community. And I just feel like maybe we could reorient the conversation a little bit. But you're right. It's going to come down to people dying and my property value, which is a conclusion. Yes.
So, as you guys were having that conversation, I'm like, nostalgia and fear walk into a bar. Like, that was what was rolling through my head. So I grew up in rural Wisconsin. My hometown at the time was 800 people. My parents both went to the high school I graduated from. And even when I was in high school, there were early talks of consolidating with the neighbor district, which I would have loved because the scale would have given me opportunities that I didn't have. And my graduating class was 36 kids. It was 12 larger than the classes on both sides of me. Now they're at 12 to 16 kids running a rural district. And the only real argument back then was busing would be so expensive. It was never about quality. It was never about the future, none of those things. And as we've talked about in the podcast, there are levels above us breaking things. It started with Doge, it's happened all over.
Right.
And with the place we're at in history, the generational cycles, some of those institutions need broken. And at least I have some hope that the leaders who are coming behind us aren't going to be afraid of saying, well, it should have been broken. It's been wrong for way too long. I mean, Phil, we recently talked about health insurance. Oh, it's going to go up another 20% this year. I guess we'll just levy some more money because that's how we solve problems. And it's no longer sustainable. And so I'm really excited. As unfortunate as some of the things that have happened have been, what happens on the other side of this era is really going to be fantastic, or at least has the opportunity to be so much better than even what we inherited, I think.
So we don't have levies in California. We can't do that. And so I think I was assuming that maybe the retirement crisis would break it. And for a lot of local cities and counties, they really had to think about doing things differently. But what they generally did was just scaled back. They didn't really change the system. They just had to have layoffs because they couldn't afford the cost of retirement of an investment they made 40 years ago in folks, and then they hadn't actually put away the money. So it's been crippling for a lot of local cities, their retirement burden. And some of them have bonds out and are funding it that way. But it's interesting to see what will it take. I mean, COVID did that for us a bit, didn't it? It broke some systems. And then it's really interesting to watch people go back to the systems pre-COVID.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say, we fought in my organization for 2 years prior to 2020 about how we could implement this remote work policy, this concept of people might not have to work in their offices, even though, every so often somebody would be like, oh, I've got a contractor coming today. I'm just going to sit at my kitchen table and use my laptop. Is that okay? And, oh, sure. Yeah, that's fine. That wasn't remote work.
Right.
Remote work was structured. And then my organization went full remote for at least our office employees for 3.5 months. And we had no choices, right? That was what happened. And we ripped the Band-Aid off. And guess what? We were okay. And then you swing back into 2026 now. And, we still have a policy. It's still in place. And I'm fascinated by the eye rolling that I see in the organization still when somebody walks into an office and they're like, oh, hey, where's this person? Oh, they're working remote today. Oh,
Mhm.
must be nice. And it's like, you are entitled to this program too, but there's this, we've swung back into that comfortable space of what we knew before, even though we recognized and that those individuals actually were functionally capable in a remote environment. They may not have loved every moment of it, but it's possible. And it's just interesting how human nature brings us back round into that comfortable spot. I think that that gets us into trouble also when we're talking about trying to consolidate. The things that tug at our heartstrings are, well, we're going to have to lay some people off, or I've worked with this school superintendent, or I've worked with this fire chief for, their entire careers. How could I bring up something that would take from them something that they've worked so hard for? And so we find ourselves talking ourselves into other things, like it's too expensive to bus, because that's that's the logical argument, as opposed to, yeah, at least then I don't have to feel badly that I've hurt somebody. And I do see that happen so frequently, where we just kind of talk ourselves out of complicated discussions so that we feel better, even though we know we won't in the long term. I think that's, going back to your point a while ago, like, you got to put in the work now to feel better later.
Right.
We're just going to feel bad the whole time.
Right. I think it would be, how do we create the spaces for that cross organizational learning? I think we're working on it independently in our own organizations about creating that space. But what are those spaces? A lot of times it's elected officials, and that isn't necessarily the right space. But what would it be like to create a city, countywide, or a Bay Area wide, something where we're actually thinking cross jurisdictionally, and doing it with, kind of our hands up of saying, you're not committing to anything, but what would it look like if we were just really creative about the way that we were going to organize government in the next generation? It'd be interesting. Maybe the innovation project might.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, that just spoke to me. So one of the things that we've said on our podcast is like when things are hard and they're obscure in front of you, and it's a little bit blurry and a little bit hazy, you can't look ahead, and there's no point in looking backwards. So you do have to kind of look side to side and say, okay, maybe we can do this together, and then you get this little coalition builds and forms. And so I got a little bit excited, but I saw Corey has a question before I go to the next thing.
So it kind of connects to something you've talked about recently, Mike, and that's trust and respect. And I get those are very complicated feelings right now with what's happening in all layers of government and social media and everything else. But how can we work together? Mike, we talked about these kind of horizontal networks. You were both just teaching at HPO. How can we find a way to maybe take that trust fall and to start respecting each other once again? Because when you lead with those two things, the accountability that is necessary for, remote work or consolidation or collaboration becomes so much easier to build on than just coming up with all the reasons why it's not going to work.
Yeah, I think when Phil was talking about remote work, the word that came up in my head was trust. That really what has happening is, as we say, we roll our eyes. It's really not trusting that people are being honest about how they're doing their work. Um, I think, early in my career, I got disciplined. Well, it wasn't really discipline. I shouldn't say that. I got called into the director's office because I was a lawyer and had come out of law school, and I went to work as the equal employment officer and was doing investigations. And I would go in and do my work, and I would shut the door, and I had a team, but I didn't talk to them a ton. And she's like, "What is your problem? You need to talk to your team." And I came home and I said to my husband, I'm like, "I've never been in a place where I got in trouble for working too hard." Right. And I think over my career, learning the importance of building relationships, that time isn't wasted, that is getting to know your colleagues, getting to know the other city managers, making sure that you're having those conversations, that their kids' names, that you learn kind of what's going on in their organizations so that you can be a support. we don't do that. We don't build trust. And then it's hard to have that conversation. If I trust you, then I'm coming to you and saying, this is really hard. Is there a solution that we could find together? And I think a lot of times, again, we get back to that we're too busy. And it's just hard to make that investment of time. And I think especially in the role of a leader in a local government organization, how you have to model the importance of that and let people know that it's important for them to go grab coffee with their colleague. It's not a waste of time. You're not, blowing off your timesheet. You're actually investing in finding creative solutions going forward. So I don't. I would love to hear your thoughts on that because I think it's something that's lacking in a lot of organizations.
So one of the things that I will say is that I am so grateful that you kept the team component at Leading Edge when you took over the HPO model. And so one of the things that you do is if you've been to SEI or Lead back in the old days, right, you get into these small groups and you're with a bunch of strangers and you eventually form these incredible bonds and you get to hear stories that sometimes people have never shared before with anyone else. So there's this incredible bond that gets formed. And I think part of it is two things. And one, it's decidedly analog, right? I mean, it is just, let's get in a room and talk for a couple of hours and just, the facilitator asks good questions and hopefully that leads to some good dialogue, but it's like committing to being around, being with each other and that time that it takes to build that strong relationship. And I think the other one is the intentionality of like saying, this is a space where we're going to share things that are uncomfortable. I'll go first. I'll show you what it looks like. I'll show you that I'm not going to spontaneously combust and die. And then right, dogs and cats won't like live together. It's going to be okay. But you set an intention of sharing. You go first. You be vulnerable first, and then you just let it happen. And it's just incredible. And so there is a point where we've talked on this podcast, like, you do have to kind of slow down. You've got to go a little bit analog. We call them, grandma hobbies. Like, what if you made puzzles together or you did knitting together? Like, there's the generation that's coming behind us is doing those things because they know that the connection matters. And so, we've kind of talked jokingly also that, right, the influencer culture is in decline because it's not real. And so what's real is the things that you make real. And that's why like the last week at Leading Edge was so powerful because it was so real. Like I was just like, I get goosebumps thinking about it because it's so special. And so it's a thread that's kind of woven through the last couple of episodes or maybe the last couple of months. But I want to say I applaud that you kept it so authentic. And that's why it's so fun to do every time we go.
I think it was definitely a long conversation about whether that piece of the program continued. And for me, it wasn't worth continuing the program if we didn't do it, because I think it's the thing that makes HPO this 7-day HPO training so different. And everyone comes with this story. I had somebody this time say to me the first day, "If you think you're going to make me cry, you're not." I was like, no, that is not the goal. I'm not trying to make you cry. But I think there is lore that goes back to to jurisdictions. But I think what happens is we say, you know, we say expand, but we're not asking you to rip. We don't want you to, to share your deepest, darkest secrets. That's not the point of this. The point of this is, what if people see behind what you show up in his work, and what if they are actually able to then ask you questions so that you can actually enrich your contribution or help you to figure out if you're aligning with your values. And we have really deep conversations about every day you show up, and this is the most important thing. I never take lunch because it's so important that I do my work. And I say, what are your values? And when they actually dig down to it, it's about spending time with people they love. And well, then maybe it's not work until 9 o'clock every night. And are you living according to your values? And the opportunity to have time to do that, Mike, I mean, you see it. It's pretty powerful. People come out really thinking about things in a different way. And then I check in with people. My whole group has been on text message all weekend. And I check in over the months, and a bunch of my groups still regularly communicate just because they love hearing from people.
It is really special. So I'm gonna tell one more boring story because you guys know I love to tell boring stories. So one of the things that we do is we go bowling, and everyone sees this and they immediately get apprehensive because they're like, oh my God, I haven't bowled in 15 years and my hands are going to hurt and I don't know what to do and I don't like the shoes. And then you get there and then you get your lane and you get your assignment. And then an hour later, all you can hear is laughter. And I make a point like you kind of scan the room a little bit. And here's, 40 adults in a bowling alley laughing, having a great time. And not one person is on a cell phone. And it is just like 3 hours of just like camaraderie and joy. And it really does, I think, reinforce this point. Like that little bit of time, that little bit of authenticity, that little bit of getting off of our, digital platforms and just getting together is super powerful. So, okay, there you go. That's my boring story, but I love it.
So it's funny that you told the story about crying because Phil and I were on the receiving end of a text that said, but no one cried this time. So the lore is real, apparently.
It's I'm not saying people don't cry, but that is not the goal.
So as you've talked about HPO and Mike had shared offline with Phil and I, like how rewarding this week was. And I think one of the returns, while digital and the systems that got built post-COVID allow us to train remotely and do all these things, what they don't allow for is the building of these tight-knit networks. And I think that is really important, not only in this field, but I would say for cross-generational learning, for kind of just emotional well-being. And it reminded me, Mike and I are on a shared group chat today where we got pictures. It was somebody's birthday. The group of them is somewhere else doing other work right now. And we got these amazing pictures. And but for the shared experience of serving on a board together, none of that would happen in my life. And my life is undoubtedly better because of, one, the people and the relationships that were built, but also the idea that even though I'm no longer affiliated directly with that group, I get to like live on with the next versions of the story. And I think that is so important as you're building cohorts and these teams, that because it's real and because there's trust and vulnerability, that it will pay its dividends. It was a 7-day investment. That's a lot of time. But what it will lead to over the coming weeks, months, and years is absolutely worth that kind of upside on the front.
Yeah, I think didn't mention, but I left the official role of local government in 2022. Had my mother was ill. I had a teenage daughter who needed some support. And I was a consultant doing the work with local cities. So I work for the city of Oakland and the city of Petaluma and the city of San Rafael. And then I work in these cities around the country. So I work in Novi, Michigan and in Bellevue, Washington. And so really getting more into city government. And one thing that I really miss is that community. And I think that local government, we take it for granted sometimes, that these are your people. And it's pretty powerful when you're in that. As a consultant, I can go in and do really cool things, but ultimately it's up to the people in that local jurisdiction if they're going to follow through on it. And I love being part of a team. And so being part of a team at HPO is really important. I was at LEAD last week and I got a baby announcement from one of my team members in a city that I work with all the time. And that warmed my heart. I was like, this is the stuff that matters. I'm getting to, share with you that you're starting this next generation of kids and people. And I think oftentimes in local government, we think of it as it's kind of like family. And I think how do we elevate that? I mean, because it is really powerful. And I think ultimately a lot of that's about the work we deliver, the outcomes that we have for people. You can go to work every day and you can see your impact in the local community. We corner the market on meaningful work. That is so powerful. So yes, I love being part of local communities.
So, Angela, I want to pull on that just a little bit because I was having a conversation not long ago with a friend of mine in the profession, and we were talking about how difficult it is to get our teams to feel like they're teams, right? To feel like they're actually all playing toward some outcome that is actually the same. even though they may not see it that way. And we were both commenting, they were commenting on their college sports experience of this bond that was built because you were practicing every day and you were going out on the field and you were winning or you were losing, but you were doing it together. And everybody understood the outcome and the way to get to that outcome. And in my experience in college, it wasn't sports, but it was, in a performing ensemble. And it's the same feeling, like you build toward this thing that you do, and whether it's a concert or it's a game or whatever, and you're all there, right? Everybody has to do it. What is that in local government? Is it a council meeting? Maybe, right?
Maybe.
So you say it and you kind of laugh, but then you say, "Well, let's talk about what we're going to do in that council meeting." Well, we're going to make sure that an affordable housing development is going to get built. We're going to make sure that water mains that are delivering water to thousands of people are going to be replaced. We are going to make sure that social services are funded, that grants that are going to help pay for that are acknowledged, and that the people that have to do all of that work are sitting in the room, the elected officials who are making the ultimate decision, the staff who are making the recommendations and are ultimately going to carry forward those decisions. Like, it's the same thing as the big game. It's the same thing as the concert. And then we all walk out the door at the end and say, "Well, we'll see you tomorrow,"
What's next?
because it's work, right? And we don't see it as, or we should, and I think too few people see it as, no, wait a second. We just changed the world for some people. We actually just made people's lives better. Can we stop for a second and just say, wow, that's awesome? I'm not good at it all the time. I'll be the first to admit it. It's like, okay, what's next? We finished that. Now we got to move on to the next thing. But it really requires thought to take a step back from that and say, nope, that was amazing. What we just did together is amazing, and we need to celebrate that for a few minutes. So let's go grab a drink after the board meeting, or let's make sure we're having breakfast together tomorrow, or something where we're actually not working, but we're celebrating the work. And it's so easy to say we don't need to do that. It's not in the plan. I gotta go do something else. And I gosh, we give up so much when we just move on to the next thing.
I think in those situations, also the importance of making sure that everyone who is involved in the project is part of the council meeting, and how powerful that is, where people can, I think it's easy for us to put our heads down and say, no, I'm just this little thing and I'm doing this one piece. But for people to understand that purpose, like, again, I mean, if we can connect people to that purpose of why we're doing this, um, and honestly, some of my best board presentations was where I had the employees do the presentation. And council, I mean, first of all, is kind of like, well, this is really great. I was kind of sick of hearing from you anyway, right? But also, I mean, you see people just sit up a little straighter in their chair, and they're really proud of being able to do the work. So I really think a lot about how do I sometimes that end result isn't shared. Not only do we not celebrate it, but we don't, it's a night meeting or it's during another work meeting, but how do we actually carve time out for people to know that their contribution mattered?
Well, we will get into a future episode where I talk about rituals, because I have become like really a firm believer that they are sacred and they are important, but that's not important right now. But we call this podcast Authenticity FM because we believe like who you are at work is who you are at work, but you are also who you are at home. So Angela, for the benefit of our audience, what do you do to unwind? What is your secret sauce outside of this world of transforming organizations and leading one of the largest consulting practices around the country?
Well, I did you call it grandma hobbies? That's where it's at.
I did.
That is where it's at. I have to say I am a really new, horrible potter. So I've taken up pottery because there's something kind of amazing that happens when you can't think. The only thing you can do is move your hands and your brain just kind of shuts off, which doesn't happen in our lives very often. What else? I am a devoted hot Pilates practitioner. I do a lot of very sweaty 103-degree Pilates. Um, I have a sophomore in college and a junior in high school, and so we like to say it gets easier, and it's just not true. It just gets more complicated because they have more complicated issues. Um, and I live in the Bay Area, so I love to be outside, and I, go to the Church of Nature. It is pretty phenomenal to just kind of be outside and hike and enjoy nature and be in constant awe of the place that I live in and the opportunities that I have to enjoy it. So those are some of the things that keep me balanced.
That is fantastic. I just right, and I've never done pottery, so I don't know what this kind of means when you just have to like give into the work. But I imagine that you can't stop because the wheel keeps spinning, right? You've got to just keep on it. So,
And
uh,
it's your whole body. It's like your core. You would never know. I know.
so one of the other bits that we do on this is we leave time for questions for our guests. And so, uh, what is a question that you would have for us? And our pledge is we will answer it, just it might be answered poorly, but we'll answer any question.
Well, I think I think pulling off that last theme, what is your practice of intentionality around celebrating the wins? How do you what would you encourage other people to do to celebrate and stop the clock a little bit? As the leader of the organization, you have the power to do that. So how do you model that for folks?
All right, I'll start. Because I'm hoping the other two are better than my answers. And so then I don't feel bad at the end
Perfect.
when I'm like, oh, okay, I have a terrible answer to that question. Everyone else is way better. I like to write notes. Um, I like to take a beat after um, meetings, after big projects, after something that I've done with somebody outside of my organization in a professional association or something like that, and take a minute and write down um, how I feel about what they just did and how important it was either to me directly or to our community or to a specific person or part of the organization. And very intentionally make sure I'm not sending them an email. I am actually writing it on a piece of paper. I go through a lot of it because my penmanship is not what it was at one point, and so I miswrite, and so then I have to start all over. But it's always handwritten, and then either dropped in the mail or I hand deliver it depending upon who I'm sending it to. But for me, that's a way for that person to know that I saw it and I paid attention and I cared. And if nobody else saw, paid attention, or cared, I did. And whether I'm important or not in the equation, I want them to know that it mattered. So that's one of my rituals.
Love that.
You ex you expect me to follow that? Uh, okay, well, so Phil, I mean, you talked about like you said something really fascinating, which is, right? You said I talked about how I felt about something, right? Yeah, how did you feel about it? And so that really is important, right? It actually is kind of who you are. I will write an occasional thank you note in if the moment calls for it. Uh, but my organization, we've trended a lot younger, and so we have like right, the generations following, and my team has said you need video and you need to shoot a video, and so I shoot a video every week. And every week I do a shout out to somebody who's done something cool, along with reminding them to fill out their uh, you know, health and wellness forms are due, but also I do a shout out. So I do try to give gratitude every week to the organization. And we had a pretty tough week. And so, just letting people know, like, I know you have hard jobs and we're here to support you. And I think people really do respond well. So I try my best. I just don't do it with the same sort of vigor and intensity that Phil does, but we all can't be Phil.
I would just say that I think that is a wonderful approach to this, and there is no winning. Nobody's better than the other.
I
It's
mean,
Just I'm saying that out loud because Corey's going to come in with some, mind-blowing thing, and both of us can feel bad about ourselves quietly on mute.
That's so untrue. But one of the best rituals I remember for 20 years of government was the morning after the election. And it didn't matter if it was local election, state, or presidential. We always had democracy donuts. And I always love that. But when it comes back to celebrating people, we would have these agendas for our meetings, and it didn't matter if it was a department meeting or a department head meeting. There were always like the growing list of insanity at the bottom of unresolved issues, let's call them. But anytime one of those got resolved, we would clap it off as a team. It was literally the ceremony of everyone in the room clapping it off, celebrating whoever led to it leaving the agenda, because there was some ceremony around the idea that something got accomplished, somebody successfully moved it forward, and then it could leave the list. And the idea was always to try to make the list shorter by achieving things. So donuts and clapping. That's what I got for you.
The importance, first of all, I think the importance of food. There is some importance around food that brings people together. I think we forget that sometimes, or we get stuck in the gift of public funds reality of local government. And that I would say that to Mike and to Phil, how much like those things matter to people. I think even if you walk around the organization, people will have those notes pinned up or it's pretty amazing how much that matters. And then we think about what percentage of our time it took for us to do that. And it's usually a pretty small percentage of our time, but to see people and to make them feel valued, what an important part of the job that is.
So that was the perfect transition. It could not have been set up any better when we talk about feeling valued. So we are so grateful that you are willing to take the risk and jump on this. As you experienced, we don't do any show prep. We just tell you, here's the time, here's the link, jump on in. I promise it's going to be great. And you trusted us. So thank you so much for giving us your time. One of our traditions is we always give you the last word. Impart to our listeners some sort of wisdom, some sort of things. And also, probably more importantly, how can they get in touch with you? How can they get to experience Leading Edge? How do they, what's the avenue to getting to you? So the floor, as they say, is yours.
So if you are interested in HPO in local government, go to www.highperformanceorg.com. You also can reach us on the KU PMC website. My email address is anicholson@nicholsonstrategicservices.com. Most important thing, I guess, thank you for allowing me to participate. The conversations that you're having with local government officials are inspiring and hopefully are a place that people can go when things are tough and they can recognize that there are other people in this fight trying to make our communities better. And the sharing of ideas, the space that you talked about earlier in the talk about really having a place for us to be vulnerable and to be creative and to think differently about the work that we do. I think you're providing that space for local government officials. But I leave you all with just be so impressed and so inspired by the work that is done around the country in local government. And it is our opportunity and our privilege to serve our community, to constantly be evolving the services we provide, and to make sure that people have opportunities to thrive where they live. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No, it was great. It was so great to get the chance to spend the week with you last week. And so I knew I was going to be excited to kind of get you on this podcast. We have been referencing you and HPO for months now. So it's great to actually put a name and a face and to hear from you directly. And I know people will love doing it.
So, Angela, thank you for joining us. Thank you for a wide-ranging conversation, again, about the things that matter to our listeners, right? The goal of this podcast is to talk about these difficult things in a comfortable setting. And I love how the HPO model really underscores that. And so thank you for sharing what you've shared. And thanks for putting up with Mike. He's a lot, as we all see every week that we record this. But I hope that we will also share, because I just found it on LinkedIn, the picture of bowling night. And there is a very prominent person right in the front holding a very prominently colored bowling ball. And that's going to have to show up in one of the Authenticity FM posts coming up soon. But Angela, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And we look forward to future conversations about HPO and what Mike's going to bring. And hopefully you'll come back and join us again soon.
Great. Thanks for having me.